So, yes, thanks so much everybody for joining in. My name is Leonard Paul. I'm the director slash the person that runs the School of Video Game Audio since 2012. And yeah, it's awesome that you're all here to have a chat and listen to what Adam T. Croft has to say. So, yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself. And yes, thanks so much for everybody for joining in.
Absolutely. I'm Adam. Hi. Nice to see all of you, even though I'm not really seeing you because I'm not looking at the chat. I'm absolutely staring at my camera. But I'm the senior dialogue lead at Bungie is my regular gig. I also do work on the side, both at my own website and at a place called Near.media. That's a project that I've recently started again and is going to be more back in 2022. But I have done a bunch of things related to games and audio and had a like almost a my career started in 2004. So done a lot of work, and I got my real first start in games by taking Leonard's Wise course. So I'm sure we're going to talk more in detail about that today. But that's I've got a background in dialogue and just spoken stuff in movies and live events and music and all sorts of stuff that then led to technical sound design and audio programming, which then led me back to dialogue, and I still program on my own too. So lots of stuff.
Nice. Yeah, well, I guess golly. So what do you typically do these days that you can talk about? So maybe we can rewind like maybe to the previous project that is a bit more public knowledge and sort of describe because a lot of people are there they just have no idea what's going on inside of a game company. So yeah, like in a sort of you know general format, what kind of stuff do you tend to do at Bungie? Like these days.
What senior dialogue lead entails for me is that I run cast division and operate like management wise the voiceover department, and it's a like it's hard to say what dialogue is in games because I'm pretty sure that every company operates differently. So if you were to go apply for a dialogue role at Ubisoft, for example, which is the other company with a fairly significant dialogue team that talks publicly fairly often, I'm pretty sure that we're not doing the exact same sort of thing and the jobs aren't exactly the same. It's kind of like when you put technical in front of sound designer, no two companies are hiring for the exact same role and position and job description. What I do is less on the design side these days and more that I manage a team of designers and some production staff. I do occasionally pitch in on design, do mix and implementation and all of that sort of stuff, but I'm more so working alongside of the narrative team to understand where like the Destiny 2 product is going, helping cast talent, helping vendor management, helping make sure like I'm not a producer, but making sure that we're on schedule and on budget, where that I know where we're going and exactly what our workload is, making sure that nobody's doing too much work and that we're set up for things 3 to 5 or more years in the future. So that means my day to day could be just about anything. I was in a VO session this morning and have had planning meetings and whatnot too. So I more so like I'm a day to day, I'm more of a firefighter than anything else. Um, but I touch my fingers on a lot of different stuff with our VO related stuff for our properties.
Nice. So the role that you have right now is kind of like a bit of a liaison between the team that you have on the audio side of things and then the narrative team slash the rest of the design team that's on the rest of the game. Is that kind of a lot of what you're doing these days?
Yeah, so the way that we do it is, and I'm not going to say this is the way to do it or the only way that it's done in games or anything like that, because it certainly isn't. We have a narrative team, so our writers internally are called narrative designers. And so they write the content in the game, they write scripts for characters, they write the lore, the backstory, the whole 9 yards. Um, Dialogue is the audio arm of that storytelling. So it's not necessarily like there's a collaborative effort for, let's say, a character comes in and needs to sound like an alien monster. It might be that narrative has an idea of the backstory, the race of the character, what gender that character is, yada yada, and how that all works out. But we being audio and dialogue, end up turning that into some sort of sound design source, and making that monster happen. And then there's some collaboration between our two disciplines as to like how that gets signed off and who decides like what the actual character should sound like and all that. And there's just lots and lots and lots of collaboration between the two departments.
Hmm.
But the easy way to say it is that we own, if something makes sound, we own that part, right? And it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's probably the easiest way to explain it. And where our two departments overlap heavily is performance of a voice actor, right? So we'll sit down and in the middle of a VO session, if an actor does something and then we don't all agree, we can sit down and talk about how that's supposed to work, or if something's going to work and play back well in game, or anything like that. Like you can think of, we need to know even from the audio side, as simple as it sounds, if a player is shooting aliens with an assault rifle, so you've got an automatic rifle going on and shooting aliens, and then at the same time they're getting a radio transmission from another character who's talking about them and trying to tell them something important, whether or not that means go over here and shoot this guy, or by the way, this is a bunch of backstory that's trying to pay off something. We need to
Mm.
know that context so that we can appropriately mix the content, or be like, that's a really bad place to put a voice line, don't put a voice line there, and don't do that, let's find another place to do this, right? So that's the type of collaboration we're talking about.
Oh, nice. So I guess, yeah, well, that's sort of what you're doing these days. I guess we can rewind all the way back as well. So you say you started in around 2004, which is, it's a while back. I mean, that's usually what happens if you're working in a senior role at a larger company. You need to have a certain amount of experience. So yeah, maybe if you can describe to people that are just sort of, sniffing around in game audio, and sort of maybe they're making a transition from another domain into game audio, but like how do you see your path? And it's not so much as like, this is the path that I took, and it's really likely that other people will do the same. It's more just sort of, yeah, describing like sort of how you arrived where you're at, sort of from 15-ish plus years ago.
If it's one thing I could say, it's that nobody has the same story of getting into games ever.
Exactly.
There's not a map, for people. People are looking, even for me, to content to go like, how do I break in? How do I break in? And it's not like I can just tell you, first you do this, then you do that, and then you do this thing, and then somebody's going to hire you. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that for AAA games. It doesn't work like that for indie games. And it's not even a you stumble upon it thing. There are things that you can focus on, like practicing your craft and getting in touch with the right people, and knowing how to get in touch with the right people, and knowing how to communicate effectively, and all those things that are all soft and or hard skills, that help you break into the industry. But how everybody does it is just done differently.
Hmm.
I didn't even think about breaking into games until probably 2011, 2010, something like that. I think I took your course and it was either 2011 or 2012.
Hmm.
And before that, that's weird because you've been doing this for 10 years at least,
Yeah,
and that's
we're
crazy.
we're getting up on 10 years now, and so we're eventually going to put something together. It hasn't been totally finalized yet, but it'd be nice to basically bring this community back together again, as far as like all the people that have sort of come through the school and sort of, been on the edges of it as well, and sort of, I don't know. It's just sort of something to celebrate at a point. But yeah, it was awesome to have you come through the Wise course right at the beginning. And yeah, I guess it'd be good to sort of say like how, I guess that like how did that experience change sort of your path to where you are right now?
Absolutely. So, circle back and hit part of the first question and come to this one too. I wanted to be a rock star when I grew up. I wanted to be a guitar player in a band. And so I did that and tried to be a good guitarist, and I was not successful at that at all. I even did, so I'm from North Carolina originally, and then moved to LA right after college to try to break into a recording engineering degree, or a recording engineering job, which I went and like, I got a degree in theater from an actual college first, but I was in Southwest Virginia where there's no sorts of like real theater jobs, right? I
Hmm.
was one of three people who graduated in my major at my college. So, which is funny because I've now work at the job that I do, and the other one of the other people is now an actor and playwright in New York City. So that's kind of
Wow.
cool. But yeah, it was weird graduating class. But I went to LA for the better part of a year to go to school and then to try to break into the industry as a studio recording engineer. And then that was 2008, 2009 when the economy crashed. So the economy wasn't in a good spot, and people immediately stopped hiring people, and studios even stopped taking interns when I was in a class and people were like, okay, go do your 3-month internship. And like
Yeah.
people weren't taking interns.
Oh.
It was very weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, then after that, I moved back to the East Coast, and like the short version of the story is I met people who were doing independent film, and they offered me $1,000 to come work on their independent film and do every job except for audio, which was really hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and eventually, one way or another, I got a job as a boom op on independent films on the East Coast, and went and did stuff in like New York and Massachusetts and North Carolina and Georgia too. And through that, I eventually made my way out here to Seattle on the West Coast. And I was doing more movie stuff, commercials, live events, like if it made noise, I was willing to work and take a job.
Mm-hmm.
So I did literally all sorts of live event stuff, anything that did film. And that's how I got my first introduction to Bungie. Because the very first thing I did with Bungie was recorded video interviews for their 20th anniversary Vidoc.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 10 years ago, because we just finished and released the 30th anniversary game pack for Destiny 2.
Oh, nice.
So it was real weird to like the very first thing I ever worked on was the 20th anniversary Vidoc, and then like here's the 30th anniversary. Wow, this has been a long time.
Yeah.
So it was that Vidoc that led me to get an opportunity to record audio on their motion capture stage for cinematics. And Destiny wasn't even a thing yet. It wasn't public. And so I was working on Destiny cinematics for 3 years before the game publicly came out. It was like 2011, 2012,
Mm-hmm.
2013 was when I was working on that. Met who was the audio director at the time, Jay Wineland,
Mm-hmm.
and he suggested that I go pick up Wise, because obviously if you meet the audio director of a big company and you want to get a job and like games sounded really cool, you go work at Bungie, you're like, oh my gosh, I could join the audio team and this would be the coolest thing ever. And so I asked Jay what I should do, and he told me that I should go learn Wise. And so I looked up what to do to learn Wise, and at the time there was not a whole heck of a lot. I think there was some Audio Kinetic videos, but you had by far like the most well-rounded let's go learn audio software. It was definitely the only one at the time.
Yeah.
So I joined your course, and what that did for me was took me out of a realm of thinking that games were a lot like linear media, that you could just make content and kind of put it in, and audio is audio effectively, is the mindset that a lot of people who aren't in games have. And it's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
Learning Wise is its own monster. Learning just middleware in general is its own thing. And then the thing that I found by taking your course that drove me nuts was I didn't understand how to get a sound. Like, if it was easy to get a sound into Wise, but then how to get that sound from Wise to play back live in the game. And there was at the time like no documentation on that anywhere. And it was very unclear how studios worked and how any of that happened. And all of the audio people at the time were like, oh no, we just make noises and then somebody else does that job. It's kind of cool in the last 10 years that's implementations become a bigger thing, and more audio people are starting to program, and you're seeing lots of cross-discipline development and all that sort of stuff. But that's like your course taught me that there was so much more than just making good sounds, and also taught me eventually that I didn't want to be a full-time sound designer alone, which is great. But that then took my trajectory into, well, I still want to work on games. I know I don't want to be just a sound designer. What else do I do? And that took a while to like both figure out what I wanted to do, get an opportunity to do something interesting, because I moved into localization before I did anything else. And that story is still telling itself effectively, because I've been a technical sound designer at 2 different places now, and now I'm a dialogue lead, which wasn't anticipated either. So it's a story that keeps evolving. And I think based on your question of how to get in and like what the pathway is and all of that sort of stuff, like as we said, there isn't a pathway, but the real answer to that question is you create your own path, and the story that you're going to tell is going to be different than everybody else's, and that's why it's valuable and unique and interesting. So,
Yeah, and I'll sort of put in there as well is that you also wrote a book that has been very helpful for a lot of our students and probably a good chunk of the audience as well. And so yeah, if you could describe a little bit about because this is a pretty close adjunct question to that was probably a part of the reason for writing the book in the first place. So yeah, if you can describe a little bit about your book.
I don't even remember the first date I released the book now. It's a couple of years ago. But yeah, I wrote a book called Quit Aspiring. I'm in the middle of writing the second edition right now. And the second edition is going to be way better and have an audiobook to go with it and some bonus special interviews and stuff, which is going to be cool. But
Nice.
it must have been 2016, 2017 that I wrote the first version of that because I was working at 343 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But effectively, like, had a lot of people starting to ask me how, especially once I was working at Halo, how I did that and what it takes to get in, and like just the questions we always get, and wanted to answer that there's no one right way, but there's a bunch of different things that you can focus on and improve at. And at the same time, wanted for that version of the book to collaborate with a bunch of different people who were industry veterans. Um, so that they could speak to this and provide people kind of a one-stop resource because the internet is great for information, but the internet is horrible for um, connecting information in a way that you can put it together in a system and kind of like move forward somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I won't even say that the original version of the book was even great at that either, but people would focus on um, trying to figure out the all of the right chess steps to get into the industry, and that's just
Mm-hmm.
not the way to go about doing it. So
Yeah.
both versions of the book, especially the new one, are effectively like, what do you need to do? Answer the question, what do you need to do and think about in order to get yourself into a place and a mindset where you're highly employable, right? So to give an actual example of what that means, it's
Mm-hmm.
most people will go, okay, cool, I want to work on games. Well, I want to be a sound designer. Well, I want to work on Halo. And then they will just make a bunch of random content and then jump up and down and scream, hire me, hire me, hire me, or post videos to their Twitter account. And then 3 months later, get frustrated that nobody's contacted them for any sort of work, even though
Yeah.
that they've said that they're open and available for work.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't, it's not like when you jump up and down and scream hire me, like nobody really cares because everybody else is busy doing their thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, so the new version of the book specifically focuses on AAA games because that's my expertise at this point. I haven't worked in a bunch of indie stuff before, but it tries to get you into a brain space of asking yourself what you want to do if you could do anything. Like if you're clear that you want to work in games, let's say you're even clear that you want to work on AAA games, but do you want to be a sound designer? Do you want to be a composer? Do you want to do technical sound design? Like, how do you want to be in the industry? And you just have to start answering that question rather than being a sound designer slash composer slash programmer. You
Mm-hmm.
gotta, especially for AAA, you have to really kind of pick one because everything's really siloed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I walk you through like, yeah, it sucks to really pick something to focus on. And then once you've picked, let's say you want to do sound design, well, then what kind of sound design do you want to do? Because the guys who work on Forza all the time, all the people there are making car sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who work on Final Fantasy are not making car sounds all the time. And the people
Yeah.
who are working on Destiny 2 are not necessarily making car sounds all the time, right? So focusing on what seems obvious in retrospect of if you want to work on Mortal Kombat, let's go make you a bunch of demo stuff that's like Mortal Kombat. So you can prove that you have the ability to make this content, and then let's get you focusing on what the problems could exist, like what problems could exist for the team who's making Mortal Kombat. Like if you find that they're hiring a sound designer, then why? Like, are they just trying to hire somebody to make a really like good gore sounds, or
Mm-hmm.
are they hiring somebody because they've had a backfill on the team and they've lost somebody? Are they hiring somebody because they're making a new game and they're trying to expand? Like what is the purpose and reason why they're hiring? And you can infer a lot of that from job descriptions, but then you can also validate it if you get the opportunity to go in an interview. And candidates never come into interview for AAA game titles going like, "Hey, cool, yeah, like let's establish the fact that I can sound design well and that I'm a pretty good sound designer and I'm worth, like my skill set is already clearly worth hiring here, and it's not that I'm being haughty about that, but like I'm confident in my abilities and there's a reason that you've called me to this interview because you think I'm worth spending time here. But like, why are you hiring? What are you interested in? What are the problems that you're trying to solve?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you can get an employer on the same page with you, that you understand what their problems are, then there's like they're going to hire you very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's just a process of that I've been through interviews over and over on the getting employed side, and now I've been through a number of interviews on the hiring manager side. And the things, especially that I like to see as a hiring manager, are that people are very concerned about our product at Bungie. And it's not even that like you play the game all that often, but that we have problems that we're trying to solve. So on my side, if I'm hiring somebody, I'm trying to articulate to myself what my problem is so that I know what I'm hiring for. And then I need to hire somebody to solve that problem, not just like quote unquote good sound designer in general. So that's a really long-winded way of saying like the book gets you through a bunch of mental hoops and hurdles to get you out of thinking in the process of like, am I even a good sound designer? Am I doing anything good? All the way to like, yes, I'm competent. Let's make it so that other people can understand that. And maybe you get hired, maybe you don't. Like, I don't bring out the book with a guarantee that you're going to get a job,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're willing to do the work, the opportunity, the percentage opportunity that you get should increase, right? Like you should actually be able to see that more people are willing to talk to you, that more people are interested, and you might not get a job immediately or something like that, but you should be encouraged if nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah, I run into a very parallel thing with people that are interested in taking courses at the school. They're just like, hey, I really want to work in the industry, this and that. And usually the warning sign for me is similarly like, it's just like, yeah, and it has to happen now. And it's just like, that's not ever really going to work for you unless you're really lucky. These things are difficult. It's like, especially if you want to be more technical and you don't have that kind of background. Like if you're doing a skill sort of transfer from like film where you've got 5+ whatever years of film audio stuff and then you're looking to transfer it to games, yeah, sure, it's difficult. But the tricky part is where, yeah, you want to make it so that we'll do what we can to help you, but similarly we can't guarantee anything, and a lot of it is simply like looking to be in, having the possibility of being in that learning, and searching phase for a bit of time, and just sort of hunkering down and like, getting, sort of like 6 months kind of like, runway so that you're not like stressed out about your rent or whatever it is, and kind of go like, yeah, like, I'm going to make this thing, happen for me, and I'll be able to be, morph around, like similar to what you did at the start of, like your career, where it's just like, look, I'm interested in audio, I'm going to do this in audio and that in audio. And I, for me, I did similar. Like I started out doing coding and then I moved more into the content side of things, and now I'm more on the educational side. So, and I still work in games too. So for me, it is a lot of that where it's difficult to know what it is until you experience a bit of that. And sometimes just getting in the door and doing sort of those small roles, either doing QA or doing, whatever, like the entry level stuff, those can be very helpful because you get you make those networking contacts with people and go like, yeah, I want to do that and I'm not so interested in that. And like the thing of being able to say when you're just starting out that I'm not interested in that is actually kind of tricky. I think that's one of the hardest things for people
Super
to.
hard.
It is, because they're just like, oh, if I miss this, then it might never happen. And it's like, well, you know, um, on the flip side, we also know people in the industry that it is a fun job, but also some people in the industry are in roles that they're not really super into. And I do get students like that as well, where it's just like, look, I've been doing like, localization for 10 years and like, but I really want to like, make my own sounds and like, and I want to design my own things, or I want to move from like, moving from like me, whatever. I want to move from programming into doing something that's more creative, like on the, whatever, soft creative side. Coding can be quite creative too, but and I like that balance. So sometimes it is trying to have that combination of like knowing, having a better idea of what's out there, and then sort of being very refined on like what am I actually interested in and what do I want to do. So I mean, with the school, I try and approach it like how to make this particular thing sustainable. Like, sure, you might be able to get that first gig, but how do you make it so that you can sustain it and really have it feed you as a person throughout your life? So yeah, it's great that you're addressing this in your work, and also in your book, and helping out other people doing this journey as well. It's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't have started doing this career without doing your course as well. So
Oh, cheers, thanks.
it was great. But I think you're hitting on two fundamental, let me call them false beliefs. I want to call them lies, but that's also very hard. That's like hard hitting. Like,
Hmm.
and I address this in the book, in the new version of the book, but to state it out here as well. Like, there's a false belief when you're getting started out, and what I want to say is when you're in your teens and 20s, but I don't even necessarily believe that's true. If you've never been in a dream career before,
Hmm.
let's say, that if you let's say you're really interested in both music and sound design, the false belief is that if you pick one, that you're never going to be able to do the other, and that's just not true. It might be that you may or may not have a career in both and get career opportunities in both, but it's not like that's taken away from you, right? It's
Hmm.
not like I've been, let's see, I've been a I've run a college radio station. I've been a DJ, like radio DJ. I've done freelance film, both on boom, mixing, on set, and post production. I've done recorded music, done live music and corporate events. I've been a monitor mixer for Fishbone before, which was one of the most fun gigs I've ever done in my
Those
entire
guys are
life.
so much fun surfing the keyboard. Oh
So
my gosh, so good.
and super chill too.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I was a horrible monitor mixer and they
yeah.
knew it and they just didn't care and they just played anyway. Um, I've done architectural AV design and video game, like, and there's probably a bunch of different other stuff in there too. But like, the world's your oyster and opportunities are available for you if you're willing to do the work to go after them.
Hmm.
Um, and what I'd say is, like, if you're hoping to become an audio director of a company one day, that's kind of a different thing where you need to kind of gain time and tenure and seniority and whatnot, right? But it's not there's not to say you being a sound designer can't also create music. And there's people that I know who create music and do sound design and might even be able to sell that music on the side and do something else, right? And there's nothing saying you can't be the first person to be a sound designer who then goes and decides to be a composer for the same company. There's a bunch
Hmm.
of stuff that's difficult in that, because then they have to replace you as the sound designer, right? But most companies don't want somebody who's just hating the work that they're doing too.
Yeah.
The other false belief in there too is that once you get your dream job, everything is good, done, and you're happy for the rest of your life, and it's the coolest thing ever.
Uh-huh.
And as the senior dialogue lead at a giant game studio, I can attest to you that as soon as I got the job that seemed really really cool, I'm in it, I'm working in it, and then I just want to do something else. And it's not
Hmm.
because I don't like the job that I have, or I don't even love the job I have. I love the job that I have, and it's super cool. And the team that I work with is best in the business, and it's they're amazing. But I also love programming, and I want to take on that work. And I also love like writing content for people, and I want to take on that work. And
Hmm.
also, who wouldn't love to be their own boss again, and like all that sort of stuff. So it's as I go and succeed and do other things that externally people can see and go like, "Wow, I wish I were in your position." You only find other things that are more interesting to do, and I'm
Hmm.
pretty convinced that by the time I'm 80, there's just going to be way too much. Like, there's already way too much, but like my bucket list is going to be stupid at that point.
Hmm.
It's going to be irresponsibly large. There's just so many other cool, fun things to do, and uh, part of the truth of that is you don't have to make every single one of them into a career.
Hmm.
And part of it is like nothing is going to be able to teach you externally how to be content with where you're at internally, right? So if you're working at Jimmy John's today and you really want to break into games, like you might want to hustle and work your tail off to go work in games, but the game job isn't gonna be the thing that makes you feel less like an imposter or whatever. It'll be a better work situation. You could have more fun, and there's a lot of pros that come with that. But it's not going to solve like your entire life and just be the best thing in the history of the universe. At least that's not my experience of it. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And I also think that one of the reasons that I've stayed in games for a while is simply because it does morph a lot. Like there's new technologies that come up, but then the combination of technologies plus, new artistic practices that come up from those technologies for me is like essential. Like I just love that. So I've found like over the years that yeah, there's always something new kind of around the corner, and like with us talking about that the school's been around almost 10 years. Honestly, that's the longest I've ever had a job. Before that,
awesome.
when I was teaching at VFS at the Vancouver Film School, I was there for I was there for 5 years, and that was the longest job that I had ever had. So to me, I think that maybe that's more where it seems like some kind of careers are heading these days. Like people are talking about sort of you have it's more of kind of like a chunky career path. You have different titles and stuff as you sort of move in different spheres. Whereas back in the day, you would just get like one job and like do that for your however many years. But yeah, I think that it's important to have like that love of and just curiosity to continue with that throughout your career, especially if you're going to do like game audio. I find that sometimes you can definitely find roles within game audio that are very set. That's possible. But I find most of the roles, they require a little bit of like, oh wow, I have no idea what this is gonna be like. Let's do it. And to have that as a kind of as a I don't know, as a sort of a guiding sort of thing for your own path, I think is important. And like you say, it's just you're never in a sense gonna like, at least I don't think you'll ever get there. You'd be like, hey, all right, life solved, check.
I mean, I never thought this like this. The role that I have now didn't exist before I had it. There was not a dialogue department at Bungie in what I started in 2019 full time.
Hmm.
And in 2016, I was working at Microsoft in localization and being like, oh, it would be really cool to work on dialogue at Bungie because that was the other connection that I had. But it took years, literal years, for that
Yep.
job to develop and to become a real thing. And even when it did, like I didn't know when they posted it. Somebody reached out to me about it, and and at the time when I applied for it, it wasn't like it had gone away from being my dream job at that point. So that
Hmm.
was funny, but like, and especially with the AAA format, most people tend to contract, hit at least a few contracts before they're hired full time for a thing, and the how good or bad that is debatable. But if nothing else, it gives you the opportunity to jump from team to team and experience different ways of working, experience creating different types of sound or music, and kind of gives you the lay of the land for how game development in the industry works as a whole too. So
Yeah. Well, I think what we'll do is we're gonna jump to questions from the audience here
sweet.
because I see little things. I'm gonna go over here to the live event. Oh my goodness. Okay. Yes, about the book. No question marks yet. Okay, here we go. So we've got Nathan asking question. His question is, so first one, in some industries, it's hard to shift between roles within one discipline, like at a large visual effects company. Shifting from lighting to modeling is tough to execute. In AAA, with multi-year game schedules, how easy or hard are these shifts, like from weapons to Foley to dialogue to music implementation?
Yeah. Let's tackle the obvious elephant in the room, and let's say test to audio, right? Because that's the one of the big misnomers that people have. Well, maybe it's not even a misnomer, but I've kind of had people come to me and say like, "Well, can I get into test and QA and then transfer into audio?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, no matter what discipline you're talking about transferring to or from in AAA games, here's the questions you have to answer. if they're going to hire you, they're hiring you for one job. And so in our example, we're going to say test. And your job is to become a really, really good tester, right? So you're playing through the game, you're finding bugs, you're finding problems, and you're alerting other people on the team to what's going on that's wrong. You're learning the skill set of how to jump through the game quickly. You're learning the skill set of how to communicate effectively. You're learning the skill set of how to file bugs. You're learning a bunch of different systems. Maybe you're even trying to work against milestones to test content before it goes out, right? And let's say you're even working on audio test, and so you're learning and filing audio bugs, right? The problem is you get so good at that you're valuable as a tester.
Hmm.
And so if your job and if your heart's desire is that you went into audio test because you want to do audio and become a sound designer, well, you're valuable as an audio tester, and you might be so valuable that it's difficult to replace you because you're doing a very important, very necessary job, right?
Hmm.
And you internally are going to go, well, yeah, but I want them to value me for my sound design, right?
Hmm.
So what you are tasked with the challenge to do then at that point is to become a valuable sound designer and show the team effectively one way or another that it is more valuable to have you on board as a sound designer who has a lot of different assets of learning their title, and like being able to jump around the game that you're working on, and they would much rather have you as a sound designer than they would rather have you as a tester, right? Because if they move you off test to audio, then it's necessary to backfill the test role,
Hmm.
and usually test and audio don't report to the same teams.
Hmm.
So the hiring manager on test is going to have to be convinced to let you go, and that it's just much better for the company as a whole to have you as an audio designer rather than as a tester, right? And that might incorporate that you're unhappy as a tester, that you've expressed that you want to move into a creative role, that you've showcased that you're good at the creative work, that you've probably shown an interest in hanging out in some creative meetings or talking to people about the creative content in one way or another, and you're pushing all the boundaries of moving from one discipline to another to do that. So it's hard to say, like, there's not a general, like, how hard is that? Or is it difficult or impossible or whatever? Because it's probably person to person and company to company as to how difficult that might be. But the journey that you're trying to take at that point is to become a very valuable sound designer and then take all of the other assets from whatever discipline that you're working on and apply them to make your sound design so good that it would be a no-brainer to hire you as soon as a role is open. Because if a role were to open as a sound designer, you're also still competing against everybody who's external to the company who wants to be a sound designer for the company too. So you have to not only convince people that like you're the sound designer that they should hire, but at the same time that it's worth going through the difficulty and pain to backfill you, on the test side or whatever that you're working on, right? So just comes with its own set of problems. And again, we go back to that conversation being all about not thinking about what you want. It's
Hmm.
really thinking about what benefits the company and the team around you in context of what you want, right?
Yeah.
That's how I would most encourage somebody to solve that problem.
Yeah, I'll give a few stories because that is something that comes up a fair amount, and I've dealt with it. I started out as a programmer, and then at EA, eventually I came back and I was doing music stuff because I got asked to do it by one of the people there. And on the team, when I finished my first music sort of role there, the the manager was just like, "Oh, hey, I just found out that you did programming. Why didn't you let us know?" And I was just like, "Because I don't want to do programming." So sometimes that sort of switching roles sometimes means taking a bit of a step outside the company and then coming back inside again. So that's something that I needed to do there. I went to Radical and then I came back to Electronic Arts. Another thing is that you might also try maybe to have, to put other names forward of people. Maybe if it's sort of like as a roommate position, it's kind of like filling the roommate slot. Once you're kind of heading out, you could do that, but it is such a tenuous balance because you do get good at a role. Like I have done QA. That's how I started out and I did get fairly good at it. But the nice thing was is that my manager always had me earmarked for programming. So that was kind of important to have your senior to basically go like, look, we're trying to figure out how to get you where you should go. And once you have buy-in from that side, that makes a lot of things more simpler, because they're kind of like, okay, whatever, we can get people in this role, and once something comes open for you for that, that'll be great. But yeah, it can be a little bit tricky. And also a thing that I've definitely encountered with helping people get into EA and other companies is that it can be a negative thing if you're viewing especially dialogue or QA as a stepping stone. That is more and more frowned upon. In the past, it used to be kind of like, oh yeah, you get in the company, you sort of, it's kind of like the entry level kind of thing. And these days, dialogue especially is getting to the point where no, like if you're gotten good at dialogue, we kind of want you to stay here. So that has the sort of nature of that has changed over time. So just sort of a few sort of little additions there.
You touched on this, but like it's always good to articulate your end goal. And that might be a reason why you're not hired for a job, because
Yep.
if you're stating that, well, yeah, I could do tests, but I'd really rather do audio or whatever. Like, you might be a valuable person to do the test job or whatever it is that's not the audio job that you want. But like in my situation, even like I've got these programming skills because like I've built my own audio plugin and done technical sound design places and done all that stuff. And that's not part of my job description, and I'm not actively participating in an engineering role in Bungie regularly. But people internally know the skill sets that I have. They've been relied on a few times, and it wouldn't be like the biggest shocker for like me to apply to an engineering role. And at the same time, if I wanted to do that, like, I have to talk through that and work that out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Let's continue to ask for people that are joining us. Continue to ask questions, please, in the live event chat. It's just above the live event on the left-hand side there. Nathan does have another question, but I'm going to skip ahead to Miguel's question. So, question for Adam. In the case of being hired for a sound/audio artist in a real job, so in a fast-paced situation, how important is synthesis against sample libraries? Is there a line, where you should learn to impress, or does it not matter as long as everybody's happy with the design? So sort of that, line of sound design between synthesis and library or like recorded sound even.
Within a AAA game studio is what we're talking about, or just
I
games
think
in
we'll do
general?
that with that. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say what the most valuable sound skill set is, right? Like, should you be doing synthesis, or should you be working in pure data and Max for Live? Like, um, I don't know of anybody who disregards modular synthesis or Serum or even just like synthesized programming stuff. Most people think like sound is cool in the
Mm-hmm.
industry. And it's really more about what a project needs necessarily than exactly what skill set that you should have. Like, should you learn this plugin or learn this tool or learn this modular synth system or whatever it is. If you're interested in making sound, that's the biggest deal. And as long as you can make that sound work within the context of the art that you're creating for your game, that's the most important part of it. I don't think, from my perspective at least, it's never been about the tools and what you're trying to learn. What I've always done is, I'm really interested in something. Let me see how I can apply it and make it work within this creative box in a really cool, unique, different way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the educational side of things, I do try to keep things fairly accessible. So I do have gear and stuff, but I also think that as an educator primarily, that I believe you can do anything that you need to, AAA or otherwise, with a very limited set of tools. It can be a little bit, difficult. It's kind of like having a cheap guitar and trying to like, rock out in front of a, cast of thousands, but it's possible. So it's sort of like use what you have really, well, and figure out sort of what your creative strengths are with that, and develop a bit of a style too. Have the ability to be flexible, but I mean it comes up a lot online where it's just I think it's important not to think that your tools are holding you back. Like, there's definitely things that are helpful. Having a laptop, having a microphone. But once you get past that, a lot of it is kind of like gravy, and it's very difficult, when you're starting out because you're just like, oh my gosh, look at that like synth wall, and like, oh my gosh, they've got all those amplifiers, and at the end of it, yeah, like those things, those kind of toys are nice to have. But the thing is that for the people that are really doing it, they could rock out with like like an H1 or whatever it is, and like get all the sounds done, and it would be pretty good. So just to say that on the confidence side, it's difficult when you're starting out to see that that's not a limitation. But yeah, either be it synthesis or samples or recording, whatever it is, it's trying to fit what the game needs. This is exactly what you're saying. Okay, cool. Let's grab some more questions here. Oh, a new unreads. There we go. Okay. Okay. Hi, this is from Jamie. General question here. How would you say game audio, or any particular aspect of it, including development, is changing or evolving? Thanks.
It's probably easier to get a full-time career in games than it's ever been. It's not that like attaining the career is easier. Um, Something I don't think most people will think about. Lots and lots and lots of games are turning into a live service from a AAA perspective, and it used to be that big companies would staff up for a game like a Halo, and they would do it with a vast majority of the staff being contracted staff for a limited period of time, with very few full-time employees running and managing that staff. And then as soon as a Halo or a whatever would be released, a lot of the staff who were contractors would be let go, and there would be not like quote unquote mass layoffs or something like that, but people, if there's no project to work on, then there's no reason to keep people on board. It's If you were doing an indie project, it's much the same way. You're contracted for a certain period of time. It's just that like indie is such a way that it's not like there's usually a giant company behind it, right? But now with games being a live service, there's not a reason. Well, we're pumping out so much content across AAA games that like Destiny 2's got usually at least 5 releases a year. And so when we're done working on one, we're already on to the next one. I can't even tell you, like, there's people who are commenting to me about the content that we made, we're season 15 is live right now. And they're like, oh, this one story beat on this thing that you guys did, and it was amazing. And I'm like, that was so long ago for me, and I don't remember any.
Yep.
It comes with its own set of challenges too, because I think it's easy to say that like the industry term for overwork is crunch, and I think that term is very stupid. It's just overtime and overwork.
Yeah.
And other industries have solved that problem already.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult when you're constantly pumping out content to realize when you're working 60 to 80-hour work weeks. It's very easy when you've got a deadline and everybody has to hit it all at the same time, and you're running this massive sprint with hundreds of people. And that's where you get stories like, the release of Halo 2 is known as this like death march that it was horrible for people to do, and and they've got quote unquote war stories and all that of making that game. I would say that people don't necessarily work less. It's that you have to be smart and be aware of how you work. So a lot of my job as a manager, for example, is checking in on people, going like, hey, how much have you been working? Like, what have you been working on? What are you tasked out with? Let's make sure that we're not asking you to do too much. Because it's very easy, especially in like remote COVID world, to not know everything that everybody's taking on. But all that to be said, because of the live service format and model of AAA games, especially, like it's way easier to land something now full time, like as a full company employee, than it ever has been. And I hope that the business models continue to allow us to do that.
Yeah, I know that locally in Vancouver here that companies are, how do you say, Basically competing over potential hires. So that is good for the school because, we have people coming out. But yeah, like I'm, helping out several sets of students, apply to jobs. And yeah, it's interesting. I have never had this amount of, companies approach the school to be like, hey, we're looking for people, this is our criteria, that we're looking for. We're like, keeping it open, and these are sort of the benefits and stuff like that. And yeah, it's basically sort of, it's also the other side of it that also the school has kind of been fortunate enough to, during these crazy times, is that people have been leveling up their own skill sets. So the school has, grown partly because of that, and that's why it's great to have, people helping us out. So we have Jordan helping out with being a TA, and then Viviana is helping. She works at EA as well, doing feedback for student assignments, and then of course I'm basically, full time doing stuff with the school. And yeah, it's never been, we've never had this amount of people. And then like the amount of jobs that are out there, we post a job, like a fairly good new job a day, like with the school's Twitter. So it's, yeah, I've been doing it for a while, and I've never seen it like this. And it is exciting. And yeah, like similarly, I really kind of also cautiously hope that it also takes us in a bit of a new direction where companies maybe, realize that, with the people having the flexibility of staying at home and stuff like that, of changing their hours to just go like, look, we don't need to like, crunch people as much. And people are pushing back against that as well. So I think it's a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go for another question here. Okay, so live services. Just asking that that's synonymous with DLCs, right? And yeah, basically. And it's a
Yeah,
lot.
it's I would call it the Riot Games model because I think that they were the first people to perfect it, where you get you buy a disc maybe, but then you get one game with updated content over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what hiring model in general does game audio follow? Do companies hire sound designers, etc., into their circle typically, or does the industry prefer something closer to a freelance model? Speaking more to companies that turn out AAA titles rather than indie companies. So, yeah. Oh, and then yeah,
Um,
this has been partially addressed, but we can give it another little pass.
yeah, there's definitely in-house sound designers, and how many in-house sound designers is a question. The same thing with dialogue. Like dialogue's a fairly new discipline around AAA. That like, God, I don't want to speak for other companies, but I'm sure like Naughty Dog has a couple of different people because Last of Us is a very cinematic style of game, and Ubisoft has had a dialogue department for quite a while, as far as I understand it. Um, Music is an interesting thing because some teams have in-house composers. We have a team at Bungie of in-house composers, but there's also external composers that we utilize their work. And I know some other companies, I'm not going to name a bunch of them or anything, but there's other companies that are well known who have no internal music people,
Mm-hmm.
who literally their internal music staff is more of like production crews and managing external vendors and or implementing that music. And so if you're actually composing the songs, then all of that work is actually done as an external contractor. So you'd be a 1099 employee in the U.S. Um, so it really depends on team to team, like what they're looking for and what they need and how they work. But I mean, Twitter is fairly ubiquitous today, and lots of people from different companies have Twitter accounts, so it's pretty easy to see who is doing what. And if you don't find many people doing like music, let's say at one company, then it's probably safe to say that they're not hiring a lot for it. So
Yeah, yeah. My main AAA experience is with Electronic Arts in Canada and Vancouver here, and yeah, it is usually the rule that composers are not hired. They're just contracted. There's a fair amount of money being contracted, but yeah, usually not on staff. Whereas when I started out in the '90s, it was the opposite, where you had sort of the composer usually was like the audio people were music people, so they had like a MIDI rig, and they would also do some sort of sound design type stuff too. But that is not the case anymore. Basically, the larger AAA companies, they look at everything that's out there. Either they can get stuff that's already stemmed out through like, music libraries, or they just, hire whoever it is, and those people can be exactly the same people and exactly the same teams, like, the Hans Zimmers or, whatever, the Atticus Rosses or whoever of the world. And those domains are basically parallel these days. So yeah, games and music stuff, big money. So sometimes, I mean, I do music as well. I was similarly wanting to be a bit of a rock star when I was younger, and I'm kind of glad that I chose my path to do more programming, for money, and then doing music kind of on the side, not so much for money. But yeah, I think that it's a good distinction to have. Is that and there's definitely a lot of composers that come through the course, and I try to be like, hey, it's good to also know a little bit of sound design, and if you don't want to do that, then at least dig into the implementation side of things, because it's just, I think it's a bit of a tricky thing to just be a full music person in games. It's possible, but it's a little tricky.
I'll also lay out the difference too, because there's two different types of contractors in games, especially speaking to AAA specifically. So you can look up Microsoft and whatever court cases around this, but um, larger companies hire what they call contractors as like contracted employees. So there is external sourcing company that if you might be hired to work on a game like Halo. This is public knowledge, so it's not like I'm hiding anything or whatever. But a lot of employees, if you go look at the Halo Infinite credits, for example, I am listed as a person who's on those credits, and then I have I think it's Yo Services LLC was the company that I was actually working for,
Mm-hmm.
but I was a employee of Yo Services, and my services were contracted out to 343 Industries to work on that game. And so what a group like 343 is doing is they have a handful of full-time employees who are Microsoft employees, and then they use a staffing company to staff up like contracted talent to work on making or implementing content. And so how that works is different, and who each developer works for is different with each company. But effectively, you're contracted to work like 40 hours a week or whatever time that you have. You agree to a set salary based on what the um, the sourcing company provides, and you're an hourly employee. But usually, what they do is offer you some sort of benefits package in addition to that. Um, and it used to be working one way, and now it's steadily improved over time. But you're not usually, there's a step between being an actual employee of the company and working on the game product too, sometimes in certain studios. What I say when I mean like external contractor is when you have somebody, and music falls under this heading a lot,
Mm.
is you are a composer who works for yourself, who then talks to a big company, and the company says, hey, we want you to write some music cues for us. And maybe that comes in MIDI form. Maybe you're actually doing like sending full tracks or whatever, but you're working on your own, and you have the big AAA company as your client, right? That's how
Mm-hmm.
I started with Bungie. Is I was a I was a recordist effectively, who was coming in working with a film crew and I was recording interviews or recording things on a motion capture stage, and I quoted them a dollar price as a client. They were a client of mine, and I was completing a task and a job, but I didn't work for anybody else. So what at the end of the year, as a United States employee, I would get a 1099 form, just as if I were to work for any other company, but as myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have to file that on my taxes and whatnot. But then with that, they don't give you any sort of medical benefits, no time off or anything else, because you are your own company, right? So contracting in AAA is a little weird and different that way, where you can be in-house, like you can be working on the property and not be a company employee. You can be quote unquote in-house is the term, as a full-time employee of the company, and then you can be an external contractor with music or sound design or whatever have you, if there's a need for that too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's similar in Canada. There's just different terms sort of for those particular roles. I guess what I'll do is I'll say that yeah, we've hit the hour mark, which is cool. And I spoke earlier with Adam, and he said that he could probably sneak in a little bit more time. So we're gonna
With
try.
more questions, I'm
Yeah,
happy to answer more questions.
cool, cool. So there's a few more questions, and for people that aren't able to continue, thanks for joining in. It's been awesome. So yeah, cheers for that. I know that some people have to get back to work and stuff because we sort of, this is sort of during work hours. So it's awesome that we have this many people even. So very cool. And yeah, let's continue with
Thank you
some
for
more
spending your
questions.
time listening to me talk too.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. All right. So I think, we're at Jordan's question here. So, hey, Adam, thanks for doing this. I was really struck in the conversation and quit aspiring about asking questions in the interview, specifically the question, what skills or qualities are you looking for that have been difficult to find, or some variation of that? Honestly, I think asking that question has helped me get the technical audio designer position I'm in now. Could you speak a little bit about that perspective? When you're interviewing the interviewer, how you figure out if you're someone who can solve the hiring team's problems, which you have addressed a little bit, but yeah, let's sort of dig in even a little bit more.
Uh, Great question, Jordan. You're sticking on. I've forgotten that this was in the original book. But it makes sense because this is how I got to work at Halo in a way. And I'll tell that story because there's nothing hidden there. When I interviewed with them, I asked their audio director and some of the leads who I was interviewing with, like, I don't remember the exact question, but it's effectively something like, if you could have the ideal person in this role, like what skills, abilities, qualities, like who would you have here? Like what would they be doing? And that form of question puts the hiring manager on the back foot. If somebody asks me, and I've now had people interview with me who've read the book before, and then they reach out and ask this specific question, and I always yell at them for asking this question, like,
Exactly.
"Why do you put me in this situation?" Um, but but it also makes me a better hiring manager too. And now I know people will throw this question at me. So what I have to do as a hiring manager is ask myself what I'm hiring for. You would be shocked because audio people are creatives and not really management and leads and project managers. Lots of audio people just like to get in a DAW and make some sound or record some stuff and would love to be left alone to just do that and nothing else. And they view the paperwork as like an extra burden of responsibility, right? Or management as an extra burden of responsibility. And so some people, it's hard to get out of that. Um, and I don't say that to denigrate anybody or whatever. It's just it is what it is. And sometimes a hiring manager will think, "Oh, I just need another sound designer," and they're not asking themselves like why, other than to just backfill a person. And they're not asking themselves, well, what were the great things that the last person had that we need to keep? What were the horrible habits that the last person had that we do not want again? Or if they're expanding, like what type of voice are we missing on the team, right? And that's what that like. If you could have anybody in this chair, who would they be? What skills and abilities would they have? How would they communicate with people? Like any of that kind of stuff. You're trying to dig into the hiring manager's brain to ask what issues that they're dealing with. And it tells the hiring manager at the same time that you're not just trying to show off and be the
Mm-hmm.
best, because that's the one way to not stand out in an interview in an application process is to just talk about how awesome you are, because that's what everybody does. Everybody talks about how awesome they are because they think that you just have to be the best sound designer, and really you don't. You just have to be the person who most aligns to the problem space or contributes something new that's helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you find that out is by asking. That question puts the hiring manager on the back foot and makes them ask, like, well, what am I looking for? And the way that that turns into a red flag for you as the interviewee is if they go, I don't, because that means they haven't thought about that question and they don't know what they're actually trying to hire for. And it will probably be a bad experience for you as an interviewee to join that team. Because if they don't know what you're there for, then how are you going to know what to do, right? But if they come out even with a half articulate answer, but a lot of people I've seen come out with a fully articulate answer of the type of people that they want on their team, then great. as soon as they come out with that answer, you will know. Like, you don't even have to ask yourself. You're going to know whether or not you're aligned to that, very, very, very quickly. And that question is a double-edged sword slash grenade of truth, because if they come out and say somebody who isn't really you, then you both are now in this semi-awkward position in an interview where you have to go like, okay, cool, that's nope, I'm not doing that, and this is the rest of this is a waste of time. But that's where you're also challenged to be a real professional, and instead of going like, oh god, this is horrible, let's not do this, to go like, oh great, instead, and be happy about it and go, oh, that's wonderful, I'm really glad that you're looking for that, and at some point get through the interview and be like, well, maybe I'm not the person you're looking for, maybe I am, but like, let me help you find somebody. Like, can I suggest some other people? Have you interviewed these people? And because the truth of that question, the truth of the answer that's negative is you just dodged a bullet, and you're not going to be employed by a company you don't want to be employed by anyway. And you're doing everybody a favor if everybody responds honestly to that question. And if they come out and effectively they articulate you, then you can walk out of that interview and go like, "Ooh, there's like a really good possibility that maybe I'd get hired," and you're going to be even more excited when you walk out of that interview. And I can say that from personal experience, because that's every interview that I've had that I walked out of, and because I asked that question in my own interviews, and when I've walked out, I've been like, I'm pretty sure they're going to hire me. And if they don't, I will be flabbergasted. And that they must have found somebody way better, or they must have made a really bad choice. And either way, it doesn't affect me. So,
Yeah, yeah. I like to think of those particular, instances of just trying to find a fit. Sometimes you can parallel it to like, a relationship basically, and to just take a step back and try and look at the larger picture and go like, look, what can I do? What can I like? How is there a fit? What can I do to help out? And yeah, like if you're saying there's no fit, that you know over time one gets better with that. Interviewing is a process, and it becomes there's less ego involved in it, and you're just like, well, yeah, it's not a fit, and then trying to figure out someone else that could be a fit. It's a great way to approach it. And sort of that continual improvement idea, for me, I like to think of kaizen. It's like this thing of where you look at something and then like, what are the things that are strong, strengthen those, and then the things that are weak, try and like, banzai, like cut those little bits off, and sort of, try and improve the thing over time. And one thing that I've definitely found, being in the industry, is that, yeah, especially in audio, maybe a little less now, is that people sometimes they start out in the junior roles and then they move up and up and up, and then they eventually become a manager. But being a manager is not the same thing as what they started out at. And so I think that this is a real difficult thing that I'm not sure if we've really solved, like within the industry. But for the people that are good at it, like that are good at doing the audio stuff and are also good managers, those people are like golden. Whereas there's definitely people where they're trying, but they're just like, I don't really want to tell people what they should do. I just want to do it. Like I actually want to do the work. Like they get to do the fun stuff, and I'm like stuck, whatever in Microsoft spreadsheet, land kind of thing. So yeah, and
yeah.
those,
The other
those,
point
yeah.
I'd make. Go ahead, Leonard.
Oh,
I
I
don't
was
want to
just gonna
interrupt.
say, for those kind of people, it's similar to the interview thing. Like if you happen to be at a company that's, where either your boss or other people that you're working with are like that. That could also be like a where you reach out as well, and you're just like, well, maybe not if they're your senior, but it could be something where it's trying to articulate like maybe you want to do something else, like to try and to bring it in somehow, to say like, hey, I'm interested in doing these other things, and like if you could do something different, like what would you be doing? And if there's a more of an open environment where you can express that and not feel like people are trying to pigeonhole you or hold something against you because they're like, I can get rid of that person because they expressed that they want to do something else, and they're not going to stick around here. But if it's a healthier environment, and then that can really sort of promote, like, help bond people together and figure out how do we all help each other, because at the end of the day, I feel like we're all human. Like we're only limited time on the planet, and work is a large part of what our lives are, and I think connection is really important. So anyways, yeah.
The only thing I was going to add to that is, yeah, you're bringing up a bunch of different perspectives, which is great. Uh, the hiring process is a crazy game of Highlander. It's there can be only one, right? Like there's gonna be a job that gets posted, and there can be only one person who gets selected for that. So by the time that you get to a quote, what we now would say is a quote unquote in-person interview, because with COVID, nobody's in person, obviously, but
Yep.
um, by the time you're doing your round of like team interviews and the final processes and all that sort of stuff, the questions aren't like, are you good? Are you capable of designing sound on X game? Like that's already been answered through your resume, your cover letter, your demo reel, maybe a test. Like all that stuff is out of the way. The thing that separates the top few people is intangible team fit things that nobody can change.
Hmm.
And so it's really hard to articulate, but getting yourself to a place where once you're getting interviews, being okay with however the circumstance works out. Like I don't want to tell people and have people interpret this as you're not allowed to feel bad if you don't get a job or you don't get
Hmm.
selected for an interview or you don't get like I think you need to feel what you feel, and if you feel remorse or sadness for losing an opportunity, it's super valid and you need to like express and feel those emotions. But at the same time, a lot of people will come back and ask me like, well, what could I do better? What do you think that I can improve on? And that's a great question to ask, but it's not a good question to ask in the like what would have gotten me this job, right?
Hmm.
Because usually by the time you're in a final round of interviews, if you don't get the job, it's not that you're bad, it's not that you're unqualified, and it's not that you're horrible, it's that they can only pick one person. And it's nothing personal, but like you can only pick one person, and at the end of the day, it may or may not be a shot in the dark who's the best team fit, but it all comes down to team fit in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, and a lot of that's just intangible and not able to articulate it and um, all that. So you just have to be willing to enter into this process, knowing just you're going to be the best you can be for you, and interviewing the best way that you know how, and being as clear and honest as you can possibly be about yourself. And either that'll be great and perfect, or it won't.
Yeah, yeah. It is one of the I see that very parallel to like relationship type stuff. You don't go when you're just getting broken up with to go like, what could I have changed to like, so that we could be together. And it's just
Yeah.
like, that's a question maybe for a few months down the road, when it's raw and stuff like that. And also I think you need some perspective, when you finish it. And like you say, it's good to feel the feelings, but then also not to just go like, oh, I need to like, whatever, just it's good to have some time for reflection as well. Yeah, let's dig
I
into more
applied.
questions.
I was just gonna say I applied to
Oh,
Bungie around the time where I finished your course,
mm,
2 or 3 times for sound designer roles, and hilariously senior sound designer roles, which I was completely unqualified for at the time and didn't know. It didn't. It was, let's say, at least 7 years later,
mm,
6, 7 years later, that I got a full time job there. And I wasn't expecting it and wasn't looking for it when it happened. So I was, in fact, 2 weeks before I applied to the role that I currently have, I was working at EA, and I told the person on staff, I was like, the last place that I know that I'm ever going to go work is Bungie. And then 2 weeks later, I submitted an application, and here we go.
yeah, exactly. I think that sort of falls under the planting seed scenario where you have no idea what's going to grow, from things you've done in the past. There's just no way to know. Okay, let's. I think I skipped past Nathan's second question here, so let's grab that one. So he asks, "What's the division of labor between a dialogue director and the creative and narrative directors of the game itself during VO recording sessions?"
Mm. I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule. Um, I'll say as well, director is a weird term because there's the person who directs talent in performance, and then there's the person who leads a team, and those aren't necessarily always the same people. In what we do with Destiny 2, I don't direct the talent, and the narrative leads don't direct the talent. We actually have a person who works externally with us who helps us with that. And he does a fantastic job. And he's a third party who effectively can interpret what we're talking about, and he has built relationships with talent and recording studios and all sorts of stuff, and has worked in games for years. So he takes a bunch of different voices and then articulates that to a single voice to the talent. But he's an external contractor for us, so he's not even an internal employee. Um, so the question as it relates to how does narrative and dialogue work in a recording session, and let's just say narrative and audio for um, simplicity's sake of language, like as an audio person, I'm really concerned with performance, clarity, mouth noises, the ability to implement something. If we do some sound design on a voice, what's it going to sound like? Is the voice peaking or not? Is it clear? Are they pronouncing words very clearly? And yeah, some of the like, is the emotional depth of the performance good or not, right? But then the narrative side, they've written the story, so I don't necessarily always know exactly what the story is and where the story's going, unless I sit down with the scripts a lot ahead of time, which I don't always get the time to do. And so narrative is really concerned about the story beats and how things are flowing emotionally and how the characters are interacting together, and does it make sense, and are we telling a story that people can follow along with, and all that sort of stuff. So you can see how those two things, when you marry them together in the best of circumstances, we're getting a coherent, well thought out, well told story that's emotionally driven, that is clear and articulate, can be implemented into the game well, and that people have the ability to follow along and listen to it. Because on our side with audio, especially, we're trying to reduce the amount of effort that it takes you to attach to the story. And so we don't want there to be a bunch of in-game cacophony going on while you're trying to also listen to somebody who's either telling you where to go or having a really big emotional beat, right? What I found audio just in general is as much about empty space and silence as it is about putting something somewhere, right?
Mm.
So a lot of audio mix for a game is like, well, if there's going to be a lot of gunshots here, then doesn't necessarily need to be a big music moment, right? And so we have to time out silly things. For example, like what happened in any game, if you beat a boss in the game, then there's a sequence that happens where there's a big climactic shooting sequence or combat sequence or whatever, and there needs to be a music bed underneath that accentuates what the player is doing and makes them feel big, but isn't necessarily right in their face triumphant yet. They kill the monster lets out a huge groan, which is a sound effect, right? And then that needs to end, and then immediately there needs to be da 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 trumpet triumphant music that happens, right? And that then needs to drop down, and then somebody needs to give you a debrief to go, good job, person, you just did a great thing, and this is amazing. And by the way, now that you've done that, you need to go do this. And then we lend you back into the loading screen or whatever the menu is, right? So a lot of audio mix is, well, let's make sure that the combat doesn't stomp on the music, doesn't stomp on the dialogue, and that all of these things have different time spaces and they're mixed together and they're ducked appropriately and all that sort of stuff. Because if we just play all that stuff all at you at one time, you're going to be like, wow, what did I just hear? What's going on, right? So narrative designers or writers don't necessarily think of that inherently. They're just thinking about, what story am I telling? So I'm their right hand to go like, I see what you're trying to do there, and I see what you're doing is very important, and I want to make sure that we care for your story that you're trying to tell very importantly, and where you're trying to do that is bad, right? Or what you're trying to do here won't work and you don't know it. And so the best we can do is provide handshakes, right? To try to interpret what they're trying to do and try to see that there's success all the way around for all of it.
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing to happen with not just, sort of those domains, but, with coding and other domains as well, all the way across the different, sort of areas and games, which, yeah, in the best case, you have a scenario where people feel like they can support each other and they, value each other's, input and respect, and then also that you can also like properly push back as well, where you're like, well, yeah, I can see why you might think that, but and to have basically like debates rather than arguments, to really to come together,
Having a huge level of respect, right?
yeah.
Uh, if you can find respect for what someone else does and care deeply, maybe not as deeply as they do, because it's hard to care about somebody's art as deeply as they do, but like, uh, I don't necessarily, it's not my job to write the words, but the words are important and I hold them in high regard. and I hold what other people do at our company or wherever I'm working in deep, special, high regard because they're there for a reason that is important. And so let's not tear anybody's work down or say it's worthless or stupid or whatever. Let's try to build everybody up and accentuate everybody's thing as best we can in the right, appropriate times, right?
Yeah, I think with being in it for a while, one of the trickier things for me is sort of reminds me a little bit of what I was saying before, where sometimes it's tricky to actually just allow someone else to do the thing, to just delegate, because sometimes I'm just like, no, I could do it, like, because I can program. So sometimes I'm just like, yeah, I could do all that stuff, but also, like, my stuff also needs to get done. So sometimes that difficulty, that's more sort of where some of my stresses are, is where it's like, yeah, I could do it, but it'd actually be better to spend a little bit of time, get the junior coder so that they really understand what needs to get done, and then allow them to make their own mistakes. And but on the long side of things, not to say that that they will make lots of mistakes, but just to allow for a space to that happen. Because sometimes when you know how to do it, you have it in your head and you're like, I'm going to do it this way. And sometimes, somebody will figure out a different path, and to give that person the space to do that can be tricky because you're like watching it and going like, this needs to get done now. So, and I really, an underline on that idea of space is super important to basically give pacing, because yeah, you just need to make it so that people don't have, like, they're not drinking from the fire hose all the time for audio. Let's find some more questions here. And oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah.
Oh
Well,
no.
not all of them are questions. So okay. So we have a question from Fernando. A question for both Adam and Leonard. What is your opinion about a company outsourcing certain processes like audio edition and mastering of assets? Is there space for sound studios freelancers working for big companies?
Um, I think I'd need more context on exactly what you're at, like what assets you're talking about. What I'd say in general is like AAA companies externalize a lot of content. Um, Stuff like mixing and mastering makes no sense, because I don't even know. There's not really a mastering process for the game for games, much like there is for music, for example. It's not like not an analogous sweetening process, but mastering or mixing a game requires like a lot of the team to get together. Because for a game as big as Destiny 2 is, there's a lot of different people who work on a lot of different assets. And so people get in a big room all together and listen to their parts and try to make their parts work. And usually there's one or two central people who are like handling computers and calling the shots for how that works, and making decisions on things like the timing we were talking about and all of that. Yeah, like assets, individual sound effects or music cues or anything like that are farmed out all the time. One of the big things we haven't talked about in terms of like music external outsourcing is like almost all trailer music for a lot of companies is externally sourced, and that could be sourced from a library or it could be something that is asked for or just pulled from assets too. There's a huge opportunity all the time for people who are composing music to be a part of like marketing assets for games. And so there's a lot of different places where you might not just be an in-house employee all the time, but you're working on a game or you're working on various different games all the time. There's quite a few different composers here in town in Seattle who I know who work on big AAA projects and bounce around a bunch of them. Will Roger is probably the best example of that I know of in Seattle. He's great,
Mm-hmm.
and has worked on a bunch of huge stuff recently. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, including, I guess, Mortal Kombat and other titles. So
super good too. All of his stuff is so good.
yeah, yeah, he did a great talk down at Game SoundCon a while back. The last time, I guess, the one that I was in person for. So yeah, yeah. So I guess maybe let's see if we can sort of turn this question around a little bit, unless he wants to elaborate. So let me look at it again. Okay, I mean for voice and dialogue assets. So what is your opinion about a company outsourcing certain processes like audio edition and mastering of assets for dialogue? So is there space for
Um,
freelancers working for big companies in this space?
yeah, like, but the weird thing about it is like the necessary part of the external working on dialogue assets is like the tedious work of doing RX.
Mm-hmm.
Like taking out mouth noises and room tone and just polishing up an VO asset so that it can either be designed and or immediately like normalized and put in the game, right? So it's what I'd say is the where the opportunity lie for that is in the unsexy work of just dialogue cleanup for the most part. I'd say if you wanted to do the design work on VO, what you're probably going to find externally to do that sort of stuff as a freelancer is to work on indie titles. So which is its own thing, but I even then I would wonder. I just don't know enough about the network there and the amount of people doing it. If a indie title would hire a sound designer specifically to work on VO assets or something like that, like I feel like that would have to be a narrative-heavy game, and you would probably be working on other stuff at the same time.
Yeah, I found when working at EA, I did a bit of dialogue for the hockey game NHL, and yeah, we basically got our stuff sort of slightly cleaned up, so there was a cleanup pass. But then as we were editing, because we went in and cut the commentary to size, and also all the putting it into a massive spreadsheet, that with that that was where we sort of caught little things, and then we did sort of a fine clean. So it'd be kind of a little bit odd to have just doing in a sense dialogue mastering for that. It's not, you would be doing, like you say, probably editing at the same time. I think that those two sort of go hand in hand, and those roles do get contracted out sometimes. But also, it's kind of also something that they bring people into house for, because they have, especially with dialogue design, there's specialized tools that you need to format the data for, and sometimes they don't really want that stuff getting out because it's trade secrety type stuff. So yeah. So let's see what other questions we got here. So Nathan answers the question for us. So he says, "I've done mastering of music and dialogue for in-game purposes as a contractor. Pay me afterwards." So RX work is sexy, damn it. There you go. If only I knew.
I'm sorry. I agree. I just wouldn't do it myself all the time, but sure.
Yeah,
I'm glad that there's people who love doing that work though, like for sure.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely essential. Let's see here. We had Miguel. Where did his question go? Okay, here. Question to Adam. After the first interview with a studio, is it good practice to do a follow up message or email? If not receiving a response in a few days, or does that show a little bit too much interest in the job and can harm the process? So, yeah, when to do the callback.
Um, I think it's just overthinking it in general. Um, I don't know that it would hurt you, and I don't know that it would help you, because usually most AAA's have a hiring process where you will talk to an HR person first, then you will talk to a hiring manager, and then you will talk to a wider team, and there may be like a sound test or something dispersed in that, maybe. And that's the same like if you were a programmer, you would talk to a HR person first, and you would talk to the hiring manager, you do a programming test, and then you would go and talk to the wider team. And there's goals for each one of those steps of the hiring process, and it's not necessarily that every company hires the exact same way and has all those steps either. Um, but what I'd say is, in any given day, the HR person in charge of the job that you're applying for and the hiring manager probably have 80,000 different things to think about other than just the job applications. If I'm ever hiring someone, I have the product to make, and then I also have the additional workload of hiring someone at the same time. So I'm being asked to answer questions about the product and then dealing with the hiring at the same time. And a hiring an HR lead for your job is going to be working with a bunch of different applicants for different jobs all at one time. So what I would say is usually it's not that somebody's forgotten you. Probably isn't that somebody that like you've either fallen through the cracks or that you're not important or they're not going to get back to you or whatever. It's that there's just a lot going on. And there might be lots and lots and lots of people being hired, and there might be like HR may be understaffed too. Like I've seen that happen at multiple companies. So like if I had to give you a rule of thumb for follow up, what I would say is when you're done with the interview, you should probably go, "Hey, what's an appropriate amount of time to follow up with you? Like a week, 2 weeks? Like what does that look like if I don't hear from you?" So you can establish a rapport like that. And some people might come back and be like, "Ah, just don't worry about it." And in that case, what I would do is not worry about it. Um, but it's like you poking them isn't going to go like, oh yeah, I forgot to get back in touch with you, man, you were one of our lead candidates, oops, right? Like that kind of thing just doesn't happen. So um, that's probably my best answer.
Yeah, I would echo that. I was going to say it's best to just ask them what they're, I do that for actually, that's a trick, a technique that I use for contracts as well. Is that when, especially with smaller contracts, is to ask the game team, like, what do you think is sort of your drop dead date, on this particular project? Like, what is the last, whatever? Is it going to take a year? Oh, it won't take any longer than that. Okay, great. And then I work that into the contract, and then I can put an overage kind of like, note in there. It's just like if you're going to take longer than a year and you still want me, then it's going to be like an extra 10% or whatever it is. And you don't necessarily need to charge that, but at least putting a speed bump in there, I think is important. It's not totally related, but I think it's good to ask because then that way they're kind of like, yeah, I guess I should have, you did everything that you could. And as a contractor, it can be tricky to like chain contracts together, and this is one sort of technique of sort of getting around that. But yeah, it's very true. Like, there's no sense pestering the company. They will get back to you at some point, and what can happen sometimes is that even if you, like a great example was your story with Bungie, where it's like 7 years later, you didn't contact them, but like those seeds that you sort of, put in the ground at that point, it took a long time for them to come up. But it's just like you can't force the thing to grow faster. It'll just take its own length of time.
Even better, the job that I currently have, I interviewed for and then didn't hear anything for a month. So I don't even think I reached out to them or anything, but I just assumed that the job had gone away. And it was like almost a month between each step that we took, even from the moment that I knew like we were signing paperwork and they were going to hire me. Like the paperwork work even took the better part of a month to get to me. So I can't tell you why, but I'm sure the people were crazy busy.
Yeah, I would say that. I was going to say that's usually the case where there's like the interview process and they cram people into the interview process. This is for AAA, for larger interviews. And sometimes it's hard to get those people to begin with. And then sometimes following up to get everybody to like, cohesively give like a response on every one of the interviewees. Sometimes if they don't do it right away, it can take a bit of time. And then if there's sort of two or three people that are quite good and people within the team are, sort of like, making their sort of plays for different people, then that can draw out the process. And then also just, yeah, they get busy with other things too. And unfortunately, sometimes hiring has to fall down because there's a product that has to go out. So there's just no way to know. So yeah, I think it's good to be gracious about that process. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, right. Okay. Okay, I
I'm so
think
excited to see the chat eventually. This is
yeah,
gonna be great.
okay, so David asks a question here. So he says, first of all, thanks for all of this. Very informative. More of a specific question. Can you give us some examples from your experience on how does the narrative influence the general style slash feeling of the sound design?
I mean, it's the jumping off point. If you're a sound designer, to even pull it away from that. Like, let's say you're making a gun, right? You're making a gun sound. You got to know what the gun looks like. You got to know the shape, the size, what the weight is, how it's supposed to feel. Like, that's what you communicate. Well, sound is all about communication. Like, you're just informing. Like, go play your favorite shooter with the sound turned off. Your guns are not going to sound the same, right? It's just not going to feel the same, is what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a long process that I take when even talking about casting characters and trying to put them together, that starts with a character sheet and a casting sheet, because we need to know like who this character is, what they sound like, how they interact with people in the universe. Even if they're never going to interact with that character in the universe, I want to know how they fit in overall. And that's not something that necessarily everybody thinks about, but that's the way I do it. Is I like to think about. I want any player who plays Destiny 2, for example, to be able to latch onto any characters that they love, and I want to let every character have its own unique sonic reason and purpose for existing. I don't want any two characters that we have to sound super similar. And mind you, like, I've only been leading this company in the dialogue department for a handful of years, so it's not like everything is perfect the way that I wanted or something like that. But I do think that our sonic footprint, especially with VO, is constantly improving, and it's great. But we sit and talk about like who this character is, what we're trying to represent, why we're trying to do the thing that we're doing. Um, Even with monsters, like how monstery should they be? Should they
Hmm.
be somewhat human in their monstery, ness, effectively? And should how human relatable should this character be? And should this character be somebody who is not relatable at all and creepy and weird? Or so we go through all those conversations, and that's the exact same thing you'd have with a discovery on sound design. It's the same thing you'd have when talking about the feel of a game with music. It's just the same process. It's just different departments that you talk to about that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's design. It all comes down to being part of that, whatever domain it happens to be. All right. Well, I think it's been a good length of time here, and I think we've gotten through all the questions. So, yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll wrap it up here. So sorry if there were additional questions. What we can do is that Adam, at various times can come back and can have a look at the chat here. And if you have written questions, you can ask him. Also, yeah, Adam, if you can put in your some sort of contact detail that you're comfortable with people reaching out at, or not, is fine. But that way people can ask other things of you. And I guess it would be good to have your website. I guess that would be good.
We can plug all the things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you are here in the chat and you just tag me, I'm in the Discord, so you can either tag me or DM me or whatever if this is the easiest place for you. I also check Instagram. I've got a personal Instagram account that's Adam T. Croft, and I have also got a different one that's nir.media for Near Media. My website's adamtcroft.com. Also, Near Media is nir.media, which will be launching actually in like another month or two here with we'll have sound packs, and the book will be coming out on there, and I'll be transferring all my products away from my website to that, which will be cool. So yeah, there's a multitude of ways to get in contact with me, and what I'd say is I don't bite at all. Don't be shy. Contact me wherever you can reach me, and I love helping people. So you're never wasting my time and never bothering me. You just need to be patient for if I'm gonna how I'm gonna get back to you and how quick I'm gonna be able to get back to you.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been super fun. Yeah, it's funny for us to meet this way. I don't know if we bumped into each other at GDCs in the past, but this
I
is
don't go to cons. I'm the
yeah,
weirdo.
yeah.
Well, if you think about it, like I've gotten in all of the different places in Seattle that I've wanted to get into, and I've never needed a reason to network heavily outside of the town. So I've never been to Game SoundCon. I've never been to GDC. I don't usually go anywhere, which is funny. But yeah, like the last plug I want to give to you all. I hope that you're all in the course already and have all taken the course. But if you haven't, if you're on the fence about doing anything here, go ahead and buy in, because again, this is School of Video Game Audio is best, especially going to be some of the first class education for a lot of different subjects, which is amazing. And I know, for example, like you learn programming here, and I put out a thing where you can learn programming. Like there's not one best way to do it. Go invest in yourself over and over and over again. And Leonard's a great instructor, and you've got great systems here. So I am super proud to be able to say that I'm an alumnus here, and seeing other people succeed is just awesome.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's yeah, I mean that's why we do this, is to basically, you know, help out other people with the skills that we have, and also it's a great way for us to learn as well. So it's a way to be a lifelong learner. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I guess we'll sort of wrap things up in the chat. So that's the live event chat for a little bit. You know, obviously, people need to work as well. So you know, but
I
like
probably have a stack of emails to get back to. It'll be great.
yeah.
This is
So
the other reason I can do it at this time is because I lead a team, so I can call my shot to be like, I'm gonna be out of the office for an hour or a little bit more. I'll be back.
nice. And you gotta get back to herding cats at some point. But it's yeah, it's great that you were able to take the time. I really appreciate it, and I know that the people that have been joining us have really appreciated your knowledge in this area. So yeah, thanks again. Thanks so much.
And thanks to everybody who asked questions too. You all rock, and I'll stick around and answer some stuff.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again for everybody that joined. This is the School of Video Game Audio. And there we go. This is Adam T. Croft, and we chatted for a little bit. And if you're seeing this in the future, well, you know, there you go. And yeah, thanks. Thanks again. This is great. Okay. Ciao.